Berlin, April 1945. A 12-year-old boy crouches in rubble, gripping a Panzerfaust anti-tank weapon almost as tall as he is. Down the street, Soviet tanks approach. Their treads crush everything in their path. The boy has had 3 days of training, 3 days to learn how to die for a regime that has already lost. His name was Wilhelm. He was supposed to be in school. Instead, he's been handed a weapon and told he's Germany's last hope. This is not a story of heroes. This is not a story of glory. This is the story of how a desperate dictator sent children to fight his final battle, and how thousands of them never came home. To understand how children ended up in combat, we must go back to the beginning. Hitler creates the Hitler Youth, the Hitlerjugend. At first, it seems innocent enough. Camping trips, sports, community service. But this was never about building character. It was about building an army. Hitler himself said, "My program for educating youth is hard. Weakness must be hammered away. A violently active, dominating, determined, brutal youth, that is what I am after." By 1936, membership became mandatory for all German boys aged 10 to 18, every single boy. What started as camping evolved into military training. By age 10, boys learned to shoot. By 14, they trained with live ammunition. In school, math problems weren't about apples and oranges. They were about calculating bomb trajectories and measuring distances to enemy targets. The propaganda was relentless. Posters showed young Germans as warriors, heroes, the future of the Reich. And for years, it seemed to work. Germany conquered Poland in weeks. France fell in 6 weeks. By 1941, Nazi Germany controlled most of Europe. Victory seemed inevitable. But then, everything changed. The invasion of the Soviet Union stalled. Stalingrad became a meat grinder. D-Day opened a second front. By 1944, Germany was losing 350,000 soldiers every month. The Wehrmacht was bleeding to death. They scraped the bottom of the barrel. Men in their 60s were drafted. And then they turned to the children. In September 1944, Hitler issued a directive. All males aged 16 to 60 must join the Volkssturm, the People's Storm, a last-ditch militia. But the age requirement was flexible. Boys as young as 12, some even younger, were handed uniforms and rifles. Their training lasted days, sometimes hours. They learned to fire a Panzerfaust, dig a trench, and die for the Führer. Propaganda Minister Joseph Goebbels declared, "Better a terrible end than terror without end." The children would be sacrificed, all of them, if necessary. The final battle was coming. But some children received special training. In late 1944, the Nazis created Werewolf, guerrilla units designed to continue fighting even after Germany surrendered. These weren't soldiers, they were terrorists. Child terrorists. Boys and girls as young as 10 were taught sabotage, assassination, and how to blend into civilian populations. The name came from German folklore, werewolves, creatures that appeared human but transformed into monsters. The irony was lost on the Nazis. They were the monsters, and they were making children into monsters too. But the werewolves were only part of the story. The most infamous child soldiers weren't irregulars or militia. They were elite troops. The 12th SS Panzer Division Hitlerjugend. Formed in 1943, this entire division was composed of teenagers, most born in 1926, making them just 17 years old. They were fanatics, raised from childhood to worship Hitler, trained to kill without hesitation. When the Allies landed on Normandy on June 6, 1944, the 12th SS was there waiting. These teenagers fought with suicidal ferocity. Canadian soldiers reported that the Hitler Youth fought harder than veteran Wehrmacht troops. They also committed war crimes. On June 7, 1944, members of the 12th SS massacred 20 Canadian prisoners of war at the Ardennes Abbey. The Canadian soldiers were disarmed, lined up, and shot in the back of the head. The killers were teenagers. The 12th SS paid dearly for their fanaticism. By the end of the Normandy campaign, they had suffered 60% casualties. The average age of the dead? 17 years old. But they kept fighting, retreating through France, fighting in the Battle of the Bulge, falling back toward Germany. By early 1945, the situation was hopeless. The Soviets approached from the east, the Americans and British from the west. Hitler, hiding in his bunker, issued impossible orders. Every city must be defended to the last man. Every man and every child. Across Germany, Hitler Youth members were pulled from their homes. Some volunteered, still believing the propaganda. Others had no choice. Desertion meant death, not just for the boy, but for his entire family. SS units roamed behind German lines, hanging cowards from lampposts, reading, "I betrayed the Führer." Some of these cowards were 14 years old. And then the Soviets reached Berlin.
April 16, 1945. 2.5 million Soviet soldiers, 6,250 tanks, 7,500 aircraft, all converging on Berlin. The bombardment began at 3 a.m. It was the most concentrated artillery barrage in history. The ground shook for miles. Defending the city? 45,000 Wehrmacht soldiers, 40,000 Volkssturm militia, and countless Hitler Youth. The children were everywhere. Some manned anti-aircraft guns, others dug tank traps, and some were given Panzerfausts and told to stop the Soviet tanks. The Panzerfaust was a single-shot anti-tank weapon. To use it, you had to get within 30 meters of a tank. 30 meters. One shot, then you ran. If you could. Most couldn't. Hans Dietrich Nikolaisen was 15 years old during the Battle of Berlin. He later recalled, "They gave me a Panzerfaust and pointed at a tank. I had never fired one before. They said, 'Aim for the tracks.' I was shaking so badly I could barely hold it." The Soviets fought for every building, every street, every room. The Hitler Youth fought alongside hardened SS veterans. Some showed incredible courage. Others broke down crying. They were still children. The Red Army showed little mercy. They remembered what the Germans had done in Russia. They had liberated Auschwitz. They had seen the death camps. They had counted their 27 million dead. Now they were taking their revenge on Berlin, and they didn't distinguish between Wehrmacht soldiers and children. Soviet troops captured hundreds of child soldiers. Some were as young as 10. Many Soviet soldiers were shocked. These weren't warriors. They were kids who should have been in school. But some Hitler Youth fought to the very end. Small units defended bridges, churches, government buildings. Some strapped explosives to themselves and threw themselves under tanks. Human bombs. Children turned into weapons. In his bunker, Hitler heard reports of these heroic child soldiers. On April 20th, Hitler's 56th birthday, he emerged briefly to decorate Hitler Youth who had distinguished themselves in battle. One photo shows Hitler patting the cheek of a 12-year-old boy who had destroyed 2 Soviet tanks. The boy looks terrified. It was one of the last photos ever taken of Hitler alive. On April 30th, Hitler committed suicide. On May 2nd, Berlin surrendered. The Battle of Berlin cost 80,000 Soviet soldiers dead. German casualties? Unknown. But thousands were children.
When the guns finally fell silent, the true horror became clear. Exact numbers don't exist. Records were destroyed. Many died unrecorded. But historians estimate that in the final months of the war, the Hitler Youth lost between 10,000 and 20,000 members killed in combat. Thousands more were wounded, captured, or simply disappeared. Some were never identified. Boys buried in mass graves. No names, no markers, just gone. But what about the survivors? Günter Grass, the Nobel Prize-winning author, was 17 when he served in the 10th SS Panzer Division. He kept it secret for decades, ashamed of his past. Helmut Schmidt, who later became Chancellor of Germany, served as a young officer. He watched teenagers die in pointless battles. He spent the rest of his life opposing militarism. Many survivors suffered devastating psychological trauma, nightmares, survivor's guilt, PTSD before it even had a name. After the war, the Allies faced a problem. An entire generation of German children had been indoctrinated into Nazi ideology. Re-education programs were established, but how do you undo a childhood of propaganda? Some adapted. They rejected their past, built new lives in democratic Germany. Others never let go. Small groups of former Hitler Youth kept the faith, forming the nucleus of post-war neo-Nazi movements. And then there was justice, or the attempt at it. Several officers who commanded child soldiers were tried for war crimes, not for using children in combat. That wasn't yet a recognized war crime, but for the atrocities those children committed under their command. It wasn't until the Geneva Conventions of 1949 that the international community formally addressed the use of child soldiers. Today, the recruitment of anyone under 15 is considered a war crime. But it still happens. In Africa, in the Middle East, in Myanmar. An estimated 250,000 child soldiers fight in conflicts worldwide today. The lesson of Hitler's child soldiers was learned, but not remembered. In Germany, small memorials mark where child soldiers fell, their names carved in stone, forever young. Modern Germany has some of the strictest military age requirements in the world. No one under 17 can join, and those under 18 cannot see combat. It's a direct response to this dark chapter. Every year, the few surviving former child soldiers gather. Their numbers dwindle. They remember friends who never grew old, who never had careers, families, lives, who died before they could even shave.
Remember Wilhelm, the 12-year-old boy with the Panzerfaust in the rubble of Berlin? We know what happened to him because a Soviet soldier recorded it in his diary. The soldier wrote, "We found a boy, maybe 12, hiding in a basement. He was holding an anti-tank weapon. He couldn't even lift properly. He was crying. He kept saying, 'Heil Hitler,' over and over, like he'd forgotten every other word. They took the weapon. They gave him bread. He survived. But for every Wilhelm who survived, dozens didn't. The Hitler Youth began with 2.3 million members. By war's end, tens of thousands were dead. Today, German children learn about this history in school. They visit the memorials. They ask the question every generation must ask: how did this happen? How did a nation allow its children to be indoctrinated, militarized, and sacrificed? The answer is uncomfortable. It happened slowly, one compromise at a time, one new youth program, one oath of loyalty. It happened because adults failed to protect children from politics, from hate, from war. And it's still happening because we forget, because we rationalize, because we convince ourselves this time is different. The children of Berlin died for a 1,000-year Reich that lasted 12 years. They died for a leader who abandoned them. They died because adults decided children were acceptable casualties. Every child soldier is a failure of leadership, a failure of morality, a failure of humanity. These are not warriors to celebrate. They are victims to mourn. And lessons we must never forget.